Thank you, everyone. Thanks for 2 minutes. Back to work. Okay, that's enough now, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you so abruptly, but the time is pressing. I'd like to introduce Jeff, who's going to come and tell us what we can do about this. Thank you, Jeff.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Jeff Murupainga Aiken tōku ingoa, he uri no Norway me Canada, e noho ana ki te taitukera, ki konei mo rua te kau mātou, i ana ki a koutou katoa, o tira ki ngā tangata whenua o tēnei rohe hoki. My name is Jeff Murupainga Aiken. I'm originally from Canada. My ancestors are from Norway, but I've been living here for about 20 years. I'm a skipper and I work out at sea, but also ironically studied climatology when I was at university. I'm going to talk about the second part. Like we saw, there are 2 parts. This is what we need to do. But I don't know about you, but a lot of the information was pretty heavy. So I'm going to open a little bit different. Just try and maybe lighten the mood a little bit, see how we go. So I want to ask you guys, if you know, why do horses not care about climate crisis? Anyone know? Any ideas? Yeah?
Well, they live in the moment.
This is very, very close. He says they're going to live in the moment. It's actually because they live in a stable environment. Okay, so like my dad jokes, that kind of worked. Okay, I got one more for you anyway, just to sort of lighten it up a little bit. How many climate deniers does it take to screw in a light bulb? I'll just speed it up for you. The answer is, at the moment, none, because they're still trying to figure out if the light bulb even needs changing or not, right? So, okay, moving on from the jokes anyways, I could sit here and bore you with my dad jokes for a while, but I want to talk about the next side of this, all right? This is about what we can do. Now, when we talk about these things, about what we're doing, we know that there's a problem, right? We've seen it. We see it every day. We see it in all these different arenas, right? We know that there's not a very good political response, not a good global response. We need to know what we need to do. But the other thing I want to point out, and I want to thank you as well, you're all here on a gorgeous day outside, and so thank you very much for coming. But the idea is you're already here already. You're here, but you're not here because you think you can save the biosphere. The biosphere doesn't need saving. It's going to do what it's going to do, right? We're here to save ourselves, right? And also to save our children and their children, and to try and make some sort of dent in the issue that we've got in this predicament, right? So we're here because we know we have a moral obligation, right? And what does a moral obligation mean? So the first thing I want to talk about is these types of moral obligations, right? We've got a moral obligation to other people, right? That's the first one. We've got a moral obligation to the future. That's also sometimes called externalities. We'll get onto that one again in a moment. Obviously to ourselves, self-preservation, it's a big deal, it's a real thing. I certainly want to sort of preserve myself for as long as I can. And then obviously to all the other living things that we share this planet, all the other earthlings. We are not the only earthling on this planet, there's a lot of other ones. So these are some of the moral reasons, some of the moral obligations why we are committed to be in places like this, to take this data and to try and do something about it. Next slide, please. So when you think about those moral obligations, it's not about why should we fix this, but how can we not stand by, basically it's a double negative, but the point is, how can we stand by idly while this is happening? We can't, right? We won't. We need to do something, right? So that's what this part of the talk is about. Next slide, please. So, what have we seen already in the world, right? We've got these flash names, Rio, Kyoto, Paris, all these places where scientists and world leaders and all sorts of famous people got up and talked. Indigenous people have gone there too. And what are they doing? They're preaching to the world that we need to change things. Things need to change. Look at all this science. Has anything happened? Not really. Next slide. What we have is we have the same sort of hockey stick curve that we've seen before. We're going to see it a couple times again. Right. What have we tried to do around our local areas, right? We stood up and tried to vote for people into, regional and district councils, into government, and get them to absolutely represent us and our voices. We've tried legal action as well in certain areas. Lots of campaigning, standing on the side of the road with signs, protesting, lockdowns, all sorts of stuff, right? Next slide, please. So, it hasn't really worked, right? And the reason why it hasn't really worked is because that hockey stick, that graph that we saw, Jay Hansen's graph from NASA, it just keeps going up and up and up and up and up, right? We need that to stop doing that, or at least start to level out, right? So, what are the issues? Why has this not worked, right? Well, the first thing is obvious, it's the short-termism of what's called democracy. I put democracy in quotes because to me it's kind of a shamocracy. But the idea is that people these days are voted into positions, the terms are short, they're there to save their butts, to save their salaries, to keep the seat warm, feather their nest, whatever it might be. Some people do actually go in with the right motives, but then they only have a short period of time before they have to work to get re-elected. It's not enough time, right? So the system that they're working under is very abridged, it's collapsed, it doesn't work right? Also, we've got capitalism. Oh, sorry, I should have mentioned other kids here. I said the C word, I'm sorry, but I'm going to be saying the C word a couple more times, but yeah, so capitalism, right? That's a failure, right? It's a failure to cost out those things of the future. That's that externalities that I was talking about. That's what that fancy word means. It basically means capitalism is all about how much money can I make right now on the things that are here. They have no issue, no concern at all about saving things for later. Capitalism is about feeding and feeding and feeding, and when you're full, feed some more, okay? Right now, we're probably using the amount of resources of 4 Earths for the people that are here right now. People have heard that thing said before. We are using 4 times as much of the resources that we need and that are required for us to survive right now. So another one here we have as well is the need for action to be collective and global. Now we're talking about something that's called critical mass. Critical mass is probably one of the most important concepts that we have to talk about today, and I'm coming back to it because it's so important. Next slide, please. So, globally, the political response, it's a bit of a laugh, really, unfortunately. It's a sad laugh because you laugh rather than you cry, right? So, back in the 90s, they were saying, oh, if we go beyond 1 degree C, we're going to be in big trouble. Well, now they're saying 1.5, and actually now they're saying, well, we're actually already got some of that baked in, so we're looking at 2. Like, what is it going to stop, you know? So we know that none of this stuff is actually happening. We are, like, no change from our present course. We're driving off the cliff, we're steamrolling off the cliff. Actually, steamrolling sounds slow. We are rocketing off that cliff, right? So we need to slow that down. So here's another representation of parts per million of CO2, greenhouse gases, and it's the same sort of hockey stick curve, right? Rather than look at the graph, because we know this, that's our atmospheric concentrations, we know that in just 30 years, right, 29 years, CO2 levels have boosted 60% more than what they were before, in just 30 years. This stuff is supposed to be on geologic time scale, not my time scale, right? So we are seeing an explosion of greenhouse gas. We are seeing an explosion of the things that heat up this planet and cause the global warming effect, right? And all those other things that we heard about before. It's not working, well, not for us anyways. The planet is trying to tell us something's wrong, and we need to do something if we want to survive. Next slide, please. So, there are solutions that are out there. I don't know if anyone's heard about Project Drawdown, but I just wanted to put this slide up quickly. Project Drawdown was the result of seeing all this failure at the international political global level, like the UN and the IPCC, stuff like that. They came together and said, we need to get together and start working on solution-based issues, right? So there are several, there's over 100 different solutions that they're working on right now. They get funding from all over the world. These projects are happening. They're kind of like the people like me that just says, enough about the problem, we need to start working to fix it, right? So these are some fixes that are happening right now. If you don't know about Project Drawdown, go and research it. The internet is a wonderful thing. It's all there. You can see what those things are. Maybe you guys have something to contribute. So hopefully you'll check that out as well. Next slide, please. There are other positives that we've seen as well, right? Small wins, you know, little victories. You know, we can wave our flag for a little while and say, hey, we won. You know, we got a W for a bit. We got things like multiple governments taken to court around the world. In 2015, for example, there were 886 Dutch citizens that successfully lobbied against or took their government to court over cutting emissions. Another one that's really important is ecocide law. If you haven't heard of that term before, basically there is pressing a long-standing legal battle to get ecocide law officially into the law books, which means that anytime anyone, any corporation, any person does something against the environment or pollutes the environment, they can be charged under ecocide law. So it's basically, it's a very important thing because you can use the legal system to protect the environment much better. We'll come back to that. But anyway, so also in 2015, maybe some of you are aware, a group of children led by James Hansen from NASA sued the US government about about global warming and lying to the people and not preparing for the future and talking about externalities, all that sort of stuff. The other side of this too, on the other side of the picture, is we've got lots of indigenous wins all over the globe, right? For example, I've got 2 examples here, there are lots more, but the examples I've got are the Lummi Nation. They're in Washington State, right on the border with Canada. They actually forced the blocking and the stopping of a coal export terminal a place called Gateway Pacific, which is actually called Cherry Point, which has its own traditional name. I've been to that place. It's absolutely stunning. If you stood on that shore and you saw the San Juan Islands out in front of you, the calm waters, whales jumping in the, out at sea, why in the world would you put a coal port there? Any port there for that matter. But a coal port, obviously fossil fuels, they need to stay coal in the hole, that sort of thing, right? The Guarani of Brazil is another example that I wanted to show. The Guarani has been fighting against the Belo Horizonte Dam, and they are actually winning that fight. But they also took their fight to the Coahiva. Now the Coahiva are one of those tribes that no one's ever seen, right? They just live in the forest. They don't even know what's going on in the world. Actually, I shouldn't say that. They do know what's going on in the world, and that's why they live in the forest, right? But the Guarani has helped to protect the Coahiva from illegal logging. So basically what happens is they come in and they go, well, we need land to run our cattle, to send it overseas and do all that industrial agriculture that Matt was so eloquently talking about. So they just slash and burn agriculture. What they're doing is they're slashing and burning these tribes' resources, their land, their livelihood, their existence. So these things, we've been seeing these wins, but that hockey curve keeps going up. All right, next slide, please. So back to home, right? I'm sure you guys know these these people. They've done some good things, but there's a lot of things that are happening right now too that aren't so good. If we can just have that next click. We've got things like industrial agriculture, which is a big export obviously for Aotearoa, for New Zealand, but they're getting the get out of jail free card, right? I don't know if you guys have seen, but they've just recently been let loose from the ETS scheme. The ETS is the electronic trading, emissions trading scheme, excuse me. So all of a sudden agriculture is scot-free. They don't have to deal with that sort of stuff. Well, I don't know where that comes from. The whole point is to actually regulate industrial agriculture. The other side of this as well is I'm sure plenty of people more remember the old fart tax, right? We tried to put on a tax to say, hey look, this is causing over half of our emissions coming out of New Zealand. You guys need to slow that down. And the way we're going to do that is through taxes. And they all went, no, we're going to drive our tractors through the town and throw horse shit on the streets and say it's a fart tax and make it a big joke. Which they did, and it never happened. So they're actually lobbying stronger against being taxed and being involved. So they just want to keep business as usual. Matt mentioned business as usual. We're coming back to that as well. It's a big thing, and that's what we're trying to stop. The 8 Rivers Scheme, another example. If you don't know about the 8 Rivers Scheme, that's a scheme that's happening, or they're trying to implement out in Taranaki. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to keep the natural gas flowing and going like liquid gold over there. And what they want to do is they want to put it into a scheme that they use that to create phosphorus fertilizer, right? And keep putting fertilizer all over the agriculture. They're trying to say it's a way to transition out of coal with another fossil fuel, no thank you, and then also putting fertilizers all over the land, and that goes back into the rivers, so it's really like the 8 Rivers disaster rather than scheme. So that's something that, it's a $60 million project actually, it's huge, right? We don't want that happening either, so there's a lot of lobbying against that. The billion trees, we've all heard about let's plant trees, right? I don't know if you guys have seen, but over the world globally, there's probably, I've seen statistics that say there's like 0.9% of the planet is available for growing trees. It ain't enough to do the job alone, right? They are sequestered, but it ain't enough. And our 8 billion trees plan here, if you've read into that a little bit more, it says the devil is in the details because they want to plant monocrops of pine, Pinus radiata. We already know that there's 2 things wrong with that. One, they are used because they want to chop, they grow fast, that's what they want to use them. Why do they want them to grow fast? They can chop them down and then use them. And as soon as you do that, all that sequestering, any sequestering they've done, is released again. So there's no point, right? And so natives, which sounds like a great idea, they're slower, so they sort of say, yeah, well, we want to use pines because pines grow faster, they'll sequester quicker. But we know the reality is that they actually want to cut those down and use them. So again, just follow the money. It's the same sort of thing, right? Zero carbon bill, watered down and watered down and watered down. I'm glad it's there. Better than nothing, but a lot of that is because there's not the political will. They don't have the political strength. You've got this sort of weird partnership thing happening in government where, she's smiling, but really she's thinking, I just want to strangle you for strangling all our projects, because I know that, Jacinda Ardern has a heart. I know she's, she cares about the environment, and we do have a green coalition there that's stronger than ever before. But we've got the old guard as well that's trying to strangle that stuff, right? I'm not even a political person, right? But I'm here for the environment, and that becomes a political issue. Next slide, please. So, I don't know if you've heard this saying before, but we kind of have to live by it now. It is something you need to take with you home. You need to tell other people. When injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty, all right? We have seen this over and over again throughout history. Our country is founded on it. All right, we have so many examples in our country where people have said this in some way, shape, or form, and that's how they decided this is my time to stand up and stand against the injustice. Next slide, please. We've got lots of examples of that. For those of you who don't know, this is a picture of Te Kuti and Te Whiti from Parihaka. I won't go into the history of these examples, but if you don't know, this example of passive nonviolent resistance was heard all over the world in the 1800s. All right? People talk, usually when this slide comes up overseas, it's Gandhi, right? Gandhi was actually the one who said, actually, I heard what was going on in Aotearoa in New Zealand, and I heard about these fellas standing up in Parihaka. So Gandhi learned his whole fight for passive nonviolent resistance from here, from Te Kuti and Te Whiti, right? Next slide, please. If you don't know who that is, that's Dame Whinakupa. She's from the north here. She was actually instrumental in standing up and saying, not one more acre. Those are her famous, that's her famous war cry. This was obviously about Māori rights, but the point is still the same. You need to stand up when injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. She stood up, and all those people followed her all the way from Te Rerenga Wairua, Kainua ki Poneke, down to Wellington, and got onto the lawn and said, not one more acre. Did it work? Partially. It's still happening today, but the point still remains the same. We stand up because it's the morally right thing to do. We stand up because, how can we not? Next slide, please. Suffragettes. New Zealand is the first country in the entire world to allow women to vote, which seems crazy that they weren't allowed in the first place. But the point is that we stood out as the example. This is us punching above our weight, which we do very well. All right, we need to keep doing that, and we have the opportunity to do it again here as well. Next slide. No nukes. We know about this one as well. Sailing out to Mururoa. I've got friends who are on those ships, right? They said, enough is enough. We're going to chase these crazy nuke heads out of town. So, next slide, please. Another one, the last one that I want to have as an example, this is from the 81 Springbok tour. Now, a lot of people have seen some of the videos of this sort of stuff. It looked violent. Guess who was doing the violence? It was the police, right? It was the state violence against passive nonviolent resistance. They're wearing those helmets because they knew that those people were going to be violent. But what happened is it completely backfired on the government. It went global. Even Bishop Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela were pointing out, saying, look what they've done here. This is great that they're standing up and trying to say that apartheid is wrong. And what happened soon after that? End of apartheid. So what I'm trying to get at with these examples is that not only do we have a moral obligation, but we have a precedent that we set over and over and over again from Aotearoa, and we need to keep on with that. We need to do it again, and we need to keep punching above our weight. Next slide, please. So, how are we going to do that? This whole thing, you've seen the banners, you've seen us talk, you know it's an Extinction Rebellion event, so to speak. Ironically, I'm up here talking about Extinction Rebellion, but the truth of the matter is that I'm here with Extinction Rebellion because I see the possibility for standing up with critical mass. All right, I'm going to come back again to critical mass, but I want to talk a little bit about Extinction Rebellion just so you have an idea of what we are, what's happening here, right? So, this was something that was formed quite recently. This is only a year and a half young, that type of thing, and it formed as part of a social change movement called Rising Up in the UK, right? They had a declaration of rebellion in October of 2018. It was just a year ago, right? And when they did this, they blocked bridges in London. There were over 6,000 people just basically ransacking the city of London, one of the biggest cities in the world, and put it to a standstill for over 2 weeks, right? That went into the news. Every news outlet in the world was showing stuff from there, and then they realized, well, we better not, because we don't want to, we don't want to give people the idea that this is a problem. And then, of course, we've seen examples of this in Hong Kong. That's still going on. We see this happening in Chile right now. Before this, we saw this from the issues that are happening in Venezuela, Mexico, all these places. If you look around the world right now, there are multiple riots and multiple supposedly nonviolent resistances happening all over the globe because people have had enough. Whether it's a social injustice, whether it's an environmental injustice, whether it's a cultural injustice, they are there saying, enough is enough, I need to stand, this is where I draw the line. I saw the other day a picture of a grandmother who was literally going after a tank with her cane, and she was getting sprayed with, what is that stuff, the pepper spray. Like, she couldn't even see it, she was just waving around. A grandmother, right? Like, these are people saying, enough is enough, we see what you're doing and it's wrong, and we're going to stand up no matter what it takes. Next slide, please. So, some key principles about XR. We call it XR for short, Extinction Rebellion. Some key principles in XR, nonviolence. We talked about the nonviolent direct action, NVDA. Regenerative culture. This is kind of a fancy way for saying that in order for us to be able to keep fighting, just like any sort of engine of change. We need to keep refueling ourselves. So Extinction Rebellion is really supportive of being able to do things together as communities, fun things, things that are enjoyable, things that basically refill your tank. Because burnout is really common, and we've been around, well, some of us have been around a long time, and fighting the good fight as best we can, and burnout is really common. So we need to be able to find ways that we can reinvest in ourselves as a community as well, and do things that bring us joy, bring us love, and bring us closer together so that we can fight together, right? So regenerative culture is really, really important in Extinction Rebellion. And then you've got autonomy and decentralization. These are fancy words, but you guys basically know what they mean. We can work independently so long as we are sort of roughly adhering to the general principles of XR, which I'm going to get into. And decentralization. There are no heads, no leaders, none of that sort of stuff. We are working together to face the problem together. So one of the ways that they do, that we've come up with, one of the ways that here we are autonomous is that we are Aotearoa, right? So you have to understand that this is something that was begun in the UK and then imported without anyone asking into Aotearoa. Now, that's happened before, and that ship is just outside in the harbour as well. And initially when they happened, it didn't go so great, right? But we're learning from that, right? And we need to make changes. So one of those changes that happens when another import from the UK, ironically, comes back into Aotearoa, we need to understand what that's like, not only from a tangata whenua, from a Māori perspective, but also from a Pacific perspective. It's a hard thing to say together. Anyways, the idea there is that it can't just be something that worked over there and it's just going to naturally work over here the way it is. So the nice thing about XR, and one of the reasons why I'm still here at least, is that they understand this and they understand the importance of what we call decolonization, right? Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on what that is and what that means, but decolonization is something that XR is incredibly open to, and that's why it is probably the most likely to